Hi everybody, a very good morning to you. Well, the weather has been something else in Cape Town these last few days. Oh, we've had the most torrential rain and high winds, but a lot of damage and some loss of life too, I'm sorry to say. Anyway, we're not here to discuss the weather, we're here to talk about the Jameson raid, and hopefully this will be the last episode and we can be done with South African history for a moment and get back to our own land. Second of January, 1896. We're at Doornkop, and we can see Jameson and his men have stopped shooting. They've paraded a surrender flag, and watching this are two Boer commandants. There's Commandant Piet Cronje. He's the most senior man. He's in charge of the field, and some distance off is another commandant, a man junior to himself, by the name of Potgieter. And also in the vicinity there, at various distances away from their commander, are other junior officers and another commandant. So Cronje is about to send a man to go and see what's going on there when he notices that Potgieter has already done that. Potgieter has gone to one of his chaps, a fellow by the name of Hansie Kloppers, and he said to him, "Please, Hansie, ride on down there and find out what's going on for me. Please come back and let me know." So Hansie sets off, and I have to admire him. You know, he's a pretty brave man. Okay, so nobody's at that moment shooting at him, but still, you know, it's pretty dangerous when one moment you're hiding behind a rock, and the next you've got to be out in the open, and you know, riding toward your enemy. Anyway, he gets there, and by this time Willoughby has had enough of an opportunity to consider what he's going to say, and he's actually written this down in the form of a note, and he gives it to Kloppers and says to him, "If you wouldn't mind, sir, please go and give this to whoever you report to." So Hansie gets on his horse again with this note, and he rides back to Potgieter. Potgieter opens it, and this is what he reads: "We surrender, provided you guarantee us a safe conduct out of the country for every member of the force. J. Willoughby." Now Potgieter looks at this and he decides, you know, I can't make a decision here. This is too big a thing. So he sends off a rider to another commandant by the name of Milan, whom we spoke about in the previous episode, the staunch defender of Krugersdorp. "You better come here because, you know, Jameson has surrendered, and we all need to talk about it." To that effect, he writes out a note and gives it to yet another dispatch rider, and he says, "You take this down to the Rhodesians there and give it to whoever's in charge." And he hands Willoughby this note: "Officer, please take note that I shall immediately assemble our officers to decide upon your communication. Potgieter." Okay. Now, Potgieter as well has taken Willoughby's note and given it to Hans Klopper and said, "Hans, go across over there now to General Piet Cronje and give him this letter so that he knows what's going on. And tell him I have told all the officers that they must assemble so that we can have a conference and discuss this." So Cronje gets this note from Willoughby where he says that he surrenders, and provided everybody gets free passage out of the country. And he's delighted. He's absolutely delighted. I mean, here is the first prize. He had been told already by Kruger and Piet Joubert, the Commandant General, that, look, by all means, you've got to stop Jameson getting into Johannesburg. Keep your losses on our side, certainly at a minimum, but on the English side as well. Try to rather capture as many as you can than just kill them. He says, we need this for political reasons. It's crucial. So the best that they were hoping for, this is the Boer High Command, was that Jameson would surrender. And here he has done the very thing. Well, that's all very well. So the threat from Jameson is now non-existent, actually. But there's still Johannesburg, which is just over the ridge. It's not very far away. And there, as far as the Boer intelligence goes, are 20,000 armed men. Now, that's an awful lot when you consider that there's only something like about 6,000 men in the hills over here that have taken on Jameson. And if the Johannesburgers get it into their head that they should attack the Boers, then, you know, the problem is really, really intensified. So the best thing now is to get this out of the way as quickly as possible. Secure the surrender, get these men prisoner, march them off the field over here, and be done with it. And then hopefully, you know, that's one part of the problem solved. So he's not going to waste time waiting for officers to come here and then have a conference and a discussion over it. Because, I mean, what's there to discuss? The man has surrendered, and all he's really asking is spare our lives. So that's fine, because that's what Kruger and that is what Joubert have also indicated that they want. So what's the problem? What's to discuss? So he writes out a note, and he tells Hans, go down there, back again to the Rhodesians, and give this to the man who gave you the note that you brought to me. Quick, Hansie, asseblief toch, you know, be quick. So Hans gallops on down, back to Willoughby, and he hands him this note from Cronje. John C. Willoughby, I acknowledge your letter. The answer is that if you will undertake to pay the expenses which you have caused the South African Republic, and if you surrender with your arms, then I will spare the lives of you and yours. Please send me a reply to this within 30 minutes. P.A. Cronje. Well, that's straightforward enough. And Willoughby looks at this and he says, oh, you know, this is fine. I've asked him for a guarantee for the lives of everybody on the force. And he says, lay down your arms. And if you agree to pay for the damage you've caused here, which is fair enough, okay, then I will spare the lives of you and yours, full stop. There's nothing that carries on after that. There's nothing. That is it. Those are the terms of the surrender. So Willoughby's quite happy with this, and he writes a final note. I'm sorry to keep on talking about these letters, but they are actually quite important. That is, if you are very interested in the history of the raid. So he writes back again to Cronje. Cronje is waiting. I mean, he's biting his fingernails. He's given Willoughby 30 minutes, and that includes the time for Kloppers to go back and forth. He wants to get this out of the way. I don't blame him, not one little bit. So yeah, he sees Kloppers coming back with a letter for him, and you know, he's hoping there's not going to be any complications, and you know, he very impatiently opens up this note, and he reads the following from Willoughby. I accept the terms on the guarantee that the lives of all will be spared. I now await your instructions as to how and when we are to lay down our arms. At the same time, I would ask you to remember that my men have been without food for the last 24 hours. Willoughby. Oh, wonderful. Piet Cronje is really satisfied with this. That's it. It wraps it up. So he gallops on down to meet the Rhodesians. So up until this point now, things are going okay. The Rhodesians have now, most of them, have just sort of lain down on the grass where they were and just gone to sleep. They are so tired, really. And so Rhodesian troops are scattered about everywhere, and their weapons are lying there, and there's no more fight left in them. Understandably so too. So now, they want to talk about, what's going to happen now and so on. And it's going well, until Malan rides up. Now, this Malan is an insufferable man, really. He's a real thorn in the side of everybody who he meets. And I'm not just talking about the British. I mean, the Boers find him very difficult to deal with. In fact, he got nowhere, despite later on in life his political aspirations came to nothing, because he was such a difficult man to handle. For no other reason. He's competent, yes. He's a good fighter. He's courageous and all of that. And he certainly had too much aggression, in my opinion. But he had everything that a soldier needed, excepting he just couldn't get on with people. So his first words, as his horse has hardly been reined to a halt before he's demanding answers from his superior officer, Piet Cronje. Wat's los hierso? He opens the conversation. How rude. What's going on here? I want to know it, he says. What have you two been talking about? So Cronje explains to him, I've just accepted his surrender on the following terms, So Malan blows off the handle. Now, they'd had a tiff the previous evening there at Krugersdorp. They'd had a monumental set-to between the two of them. They'd been without ammunition. That had held Malan back from pressing home the attack when Jameson and Willoughby bivouacked for the night. But once the ammunition carts arrived there, still in the dead of night, Malan wanted to launch a huge-scale attack. In fact, his words were he wanted to wipe them out to a man, all the Rhodesians, while they were sleeping. He says, we can do it. We've got the men here. We've got the ammo now. Let's get on with it. And Cronje, a little bit more cautious, he said, it's not going to work, man. It's pitch black out there. Wait until morning. We'll all see what's going on. We'll leave them, let them move on down to Doornkop. They don't have many other choices. They're going to have to swing toward Joburg there in that vicinity. And we'll cut them off there and see what happens. So this didn't satisfy Malan. And he actually started getting very personal. And even Queen Victoria's name was brought into the argument in a most unpleasant way. So now they haven't settled that argument at all, excepting that Cronje pulled rank on him and that attack never took place. Now Malan sees here is Jameson and his men at their mercy, and what's happening is they're all having a nice little chat. In fact, the men are now coming from all directions, the Boers, you see, and they're not angry. They're not bloodthirsty and looking for vengeance. Quite the contrary. They sort of freely moving amongst the Rhodesians. And are you okay, man? Do you want a bit of water? I've got a bit of biltong over here. Would you like something to eat? What Malan sees, there's just too much buddy stuff going on here. And then he starts saying, Cronje must learn to take off his gloves. We fight war now. You can't be nicely dressed up with gloves, and you want to handle these people so gently that you don't even bruise their skin when you touch them. And you must start showing responsibility for your position. So this argument goes on and on and on. And other Boers are joining. And it seems like everybody is giving chorus. They're all shouting the odds. as to what should be done and what shouldn't be done now with the Rhodesians. But Cronje has now told them, I've made up my mind. I've accepted the surrender on these following terms. And people on the officers now are starting to get quite hot under the collar. Jameson just stands there. I mean, he's also tired, and he has to witness, you know, a sight that he would never have seen in the British Army, and he certainly wouldn't have tolerated it amongst the Rhodesian forces. Absolute disrespect of officers for one another. Not only disrespect, but outright straight insubordination. Cronje says to Milan, look, I'm not going to talk anymore. Take your men and start gathering up the arms over here. And he says, I refuse. I won't touch one of those Rhodesian weapons, not one. These people should be eliminated here where they are now. You've got no right to guarantee their lives. I'm telling you that they will come back again, and they'll come back. They'll keep coming back until we kill them. May as well kill them here now. He says, don't be ridiculous. That's not the orders from Pretoria. Start gathering in their arms. He said, I won't. Okay, you guys over there, if your commander won't tell you, I'll tell you. You pick up. No. The rank and file refused to obey the most senior man on the battlefield, and they walk off. Terrible. And the thing didn't finish there. It carried on the next day in the newspapers with Cronje saying this and Malong saying that. Shocking state of affairs. Eventually, Jameson decides he's had enough of this. He steps back, takes his hat off, gives a dignified bow, puts his hat on, turns on his heel, goes and sits down next to Willoughby, where it's a little bit more peaceful. So while all this squabbling is going on, I said a moment ago the Rhodesians were there sleeping. Not all of them. Some of them were very busy with their weapons, spiking them. In fact, there was at least one Maxim. When they got it back to the armory in Pretoria and they examined it, they found half its guts were missing. I suppose the working parts are still lying out in the veld somewhere, buried under soil. But not only that, while all this was going on, Bobby White calls Frank Thatcher over. He says, Frank, you know, you're the only guy amongst us who's not in a uniform. Now, you may remember Frank. He's the fellow that they picked up there at Otto's Hoop, who'd come to do mining, and, you know, it didn't work out for him. And so they, you know, they created a job for him in the column and made him aide-de-camp to Colonel Willoughby. So he says, Frank, you know, you're the only guy without a uniform. You've got civvies on. I think you've got a pretty good chance of escaping. So, you think so? He said, yeah, go for it, man. I would if I was you. Grab a horse and just, you know, sort of like try and find your way through this mob that's around us here and get to Johannesburg and take cover. So Frank is all game, you know. Yeah, he doesn't want to end up in front of a firing squad or in a prison, because nobody knows at that time what their fate is. So he gets on a horse and he starts riding out, and he sees an artillery officer. Frank rides up to him and he says, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wonder if you wouldn't mind helping me. I'm a newspaper reporter, and my boss sent me out too late this morning. I was supposed to come and cover the battle here, and I've arrived here and it's over. I don't want to go back there and tell him I've got nothing to say. Did you see what happened here? So he said, well, I saw enough. He said, would you mind telling me what you saw? And, you know, I'd just like to make a few notes. And if I could have your name, please, sir, so that I could include that as well. So officer says, oh, sure. So this fellow starts, you know, they're walking their horses, and he's talking, and he's pointing out, and he's telling Frank, well, you know, Jameson came down here, and then they stopped over there, and then some of their men went there, and some went there, and he's explaining the whole the whole background to this surrender. And Frank is scribbling down, scribbling down. And when the man has now explained everything and they're far enough away for Frank to think he better start making a gap, and get away from here off to Joburg. The man says to him, look, I don't want you to spell my name wrong. I'm going to give you my card, which he does. And he gives Frank his card, and Frank says, thank you very much. And he rides off straight through the Boer lines on his way to Johannesburg. And all that remained to do was to bury the dead. And so an open prospecting trench was chosen for this, and the men were laid side by side in their clothes in this trench, and it was covered up. Perhaps just one of those men lying there may have been the fiancé of a girl who lived certainly within rifle shot of Doornkop, a place called Leopardsvlei. Now, she had received a letter from her fiancé in Mafeking. He was a trooper in the Bechuanaland Border Police. And he said to her, my darling, I've got a surprise for you. Round about New Year, I'm going to be paying you a visit. But I'm bringing a lot of my friends with me. Like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So, and then of course, please don't tell anybody. Well, he was wasting his time saying, please don't tell anybody, because this lady was true to the idea that you really can't keep secrets. So she started telling her friends, and the friends told others. And this got to the ears of the Veldkoronet there in Krugersdorp by the name of von Bodenstein. So he says, he listened to this and he thought, hey, this looks very, very, very funny, but I better make sure that it is true. So he apparently went to this lady and said, would you mind showing me the letter? Which he looked at, and sure enough, there it was. Okay, so his next step, straight away off to Kruger. So he tells them of his suspicions that there will be an invasion. And Kruger says, oh, I know all about that. Well, how can he know about that? And he knows all about it, and he's done nothing at that time. At that time, nothing was being done. At that time, Jameson was still there in Pitsani. He hadn't even left yet. But Kruger says, I know all about that. Well, if you knew about it, sir, you should have at least called Jacobus de Wet in there, the British agent, and said to him, hey, what's this I hear about British forces gathering on my frontier? What's going on here? Do you know about it? And if you don't know about it, why don't you know about it? And how far is the imperial government involved in all of this? What's going on here? Come, I want explanations now. Not a word. De Wet knew nothing about it. Hercules Robinson knew nothing about it, supposedly. I just got to say, if there's anybody in the armed forces watching this, keep what you know to yourself. I mean, much as you'd like to share with your friends and family certain things which may even seem innocent to you, keep quiet. Really, you never know where loose talk leads to. The ones that have done the fighting are very happy to admit to the newspaper men afterwards when they're interviewed, no, there's nothing wrong with those guys. They said, one old man took his pipe and pointed it to the ground and said, they lost because the thing was just simply impossible. It had nothing to do with courage or skill or bravery or anything, tactics or anything like that. It just couldn't be done. If the shoe was on the other foot, we wouldn't have got through. So that was the attitude that they had. Jameson and his officers were put in a cart and were taken to Pretoria. Quite a lengthy journey. And the men were all roused up, and they were first taken to the marketplace in Krugersdorp. And there have a a bit of a rest for a while, and then they set off for Pretoria. And it was quite a triumphant procession, if I may call it that, with Cyril Elof riding up front like a Roman emperor, with 400-500 men riding behind him. But it was I don't want to sort of like minimize the seriousness of the occasion, but it was a jovial time. They were talking to each other, the Boers and the Rhodesians, and you know, they'd stop every now and then for a smoke break and so on, and a little bit of sort of banter started taking place there amongst them as to, you know, who were the best shots. And eventually they said, well, there's only one way to settle it. Let's have a little competition. So they, at the next smoke break, they set up a few targets. Right, the Rhodesians, choose your best shotists, Boers the same. And they blazed away for a few minutes and then counted up the scores. And the Boers grudgingly admitted that, well, when it comes to target practice, you're a little bit better than we are. But out in the field, no ways. You can see the situation you're in. It's because we know how to shoot XAir, man. So, you know, there was that sort of atmosphere, which was very nice. In fact, it went a little bit too far, because when they got to Pretoria, they found that there was one man missing. He'd been there when they set off at Krugersdorp from the marketplace. They counted again at Pretoria. Sure enough, one guy's missing. A fellow by the name of Jameson. And he just vanished. Later on, we hear that his god, one of the gods that was watching him, said to him, Reg, take the gap, man. I'll pretend to look the other way. You'll be okay. And he did. God let him go. So 2 years later, he surfaces there in Johannesburg, very briefly, just comes from nowhere, gets married, disappears. And then later on, during the Boer War, we find him again serving in the Imperial Light Horse. Yeah, well, something else also happened on that march. Very difficult to explain. A trooper by the name of Toti Hay somehow struck up a friendship with, of all people, Cyril Elof. And later on, you know, I mean, when the dust had settled and everything had been done what needed to be done, Toti Hay was released, and then he joined the Cape Police. And from there he was sent back to Mafeking, this time working for, I think they were known as the Protectorate Regiment. And he served there until the Boer War started. Now what does he do? He deserts. And he goes and joins the Boer lines. And between him and Cyril Elof, they concoct a plan to get into Mafeking. But Toti Hay is he's the key to this, because he knows exactly where all the guard posts are and where the sentries walk and so on. So he guides Elof and his force through the Mafeking defense lines, but I'm glad to say that it was unsuccessful. The whole lot of them were captured. Cyril Elof ended up in captivity, and so did Hay. I'm surprised that they didn't shoot Hay, but he was released in 1902, and he seems to have vanished from the pages of history. Anyway, when they now arrive at Pretoria, oh, it's a different story altogether between the Boers and the Rhodesians. The captors, fortunately, you know, took care of the prisoners, and they kept saying to them, hey, you guys, man, stay close to us. Don't let the crowd get in between yourselves and ourselves, you know. Just huddle up, man. Come on, guys. Close up ranks. So they had to march around twice around the area in the city that everybody had gathered in to come and look at these prisoners. There were thousands of Boer burgers there, thousands of burgers. And they were jeering and they were screaming abuse and they were upset and they were angry. And they were trying to claw at the prisoners and, trying to punch at them, and completely the opposite behavior to what the Boer captors had demonstrated. Those that did the fighting were very good men. They were gentlemen. This lot was a rabble. They hadn't even fired one bullet, and yet they were behaving as though they had been greatly offended by this invasion. So eventually the procession arrives at Pretoria prison, and everybody is locked up. In Joburg, when the news came through that Jameson and his men were imprisoned in Pretoria, there was an uprising there. And Charles Leonard tried to address the crowd, who were determined then to ride on Pretoria and release Jameson. And what they wanted from the committee was rifles and weapons. There was nothing. And Lionel Phillips tried to address the crowd. They booed him, chased him away as well. And it looked like there was going to be a serious riot there in that city. When Colonel Bettington rode up with his men, he was in a foul mood. And when he heard that they wanted him to ride on to Pretoria and take the crowds with him to release Jameson, he just told them, that's stupidity. You're far too late. Pretoria is populated at the moment by thousands of armed Boers. You can't do anything like that. They wouldn't listen. And he got so angry that he shouted to the crowd, the next man that I hear talking about riding to Pretoria, I will hang him from that lamppost. And that just took the wind out of the sails, as it were. And the crowd dispersed. Everybody went home. By this time, Sir Hercules Robinson, the High Commissioner, who's, sort of resides down in the Cape, he pitches up, and Kruger has a meeting with him. Up until this time, everybody has been very careful to keep all the Rhodesian officers and all the rank and file away from the media. And this is where Kruger really shows his political savvy. Well, Sir Robinson, he says, fine kettle of fish we got to deal with now, eh? Do you know I'm going to shoot your men? What? I said, yeah. They're all going to the firing squad, a lot of them. He says, I'm fully within my rights. He doesn't tell Robinson that this was a conditional surrender. What did Willoughby say? If you spare the lives of every member of the force, his exact words. What did Cronje say? I will spare the lives of you and yours. Be all that as it may, the fact is, Robinson leaves the meeting over there fully convinced that Kruger means what he says. So he sends Jacobus de Wet and another man by the name of Sir Sidney Shepherd to go to the Reform Committee. And they have a meeting there in the committee room. Everybody is present. And de Wet says, listen guys, it's over for Jameson and for all his men. Kruger is going to execute them. There's only one way out. You guys have got to lay down your arms. Because remember, Johannesburg was still in a state of preparedness for war at this stage. Building barricades. There was no South African government presence there in the city. The Reform Committee was the provisional government of Johannesburg. And you know, as far as Kruger was concerned, they were a formidable force. So this was his card that he was playing. Either lay down your arms or I kill these men. Kerry Davids looks the vet in the eye and he says, I want you to answer me from the bottom of your heart. Will Kruger shoot these men if we don't surrender? And the vet says, from the bottom of my heart, yes, he will kill them. Their lives are in your hands, gentlemen. I promise every member of this committee, not one of you will lose an hour of your freedom if you lay down your arms. Now, Andrew Trimble was also there in the meeting. Sidney Shepherd chips in and he says, Mr. Trimble, not a hair of your head will be harmed by the Boers. So Trimble says to him, Sir Sidney, do you know what the blacks call you? They got a name for you. So he says, what? He says, they call you the father of all liars. That's what you are. He says, but okay, gentlemen, if you're determined to lay down your weapons, I'll go and tell my guys. So he walks out the room and he goes, he's got a group of policemen that report to him, and they've been keeping law and order in Johannesburg for the last few days. And they've done a marvelous job, I might add. So he goes and he says, chaps, hand in your weapons, bring me your weapons. And there are 2 sentries at one of the banks. They're a bit far away. So Trimble walks down the road toward them and he says, chaps, I'm sorry, it's all over. We've been forced into a position where we have to disarm ourselves. Give me your weapons, please. So they give him 2 Lee Metfords with bayonets. And he carries this over to his office. And he's just busy stowing these things away when there's a knock on the door. Andrew opens up and he finds one of the detectives whom he used to know in the old days when he was in charge of the Johannesburg police force. So he glances outside and he just sees a ring of horsemen, Boer horses. He says, what's going on, Doyle? So he says, I'm here to arrest you. So he says, let me see the papers. So he looks. And there, fortunately for him, he does see a mistake. He says, look at this. You can't serve papers on a person with this kind of thing in it. Go ahead and bring it back when it's done properly. So Doyle walks out, but one of the 2 men accompanying him drags his feet, and he's pretending to look at stuff in the room, and he's interested in this, that, the next thing. And when he gets a chance, he says, Trimble, they mean to shoot you. So he says, oh, is that right? Okay, thank you. So they leave. Trimble closes the door. The men outside are told to wait there and make sure that, he's there when they come back with the right papers. And he takes the 2 bayonets from the 2 rifles, and this is Trimble, hides them in his jacket, takes 2 Webley pistols, puts them in his trouser pockets, puts on an old jacket, finds an old beard, false beard, in the trunk, puts that on, takes a pencil and he draws lines all on his face like wrinkles, puts an old hat on, and he finds a part of the building that is not as closely guarded as the rest, and he opens the window to climb out, and he says he looked up into the night sky and he raised his hand to God and he said, I swear, Lord, nobody is going to take me alive tonight, so just please help me. And he walks around the side of the house, sort of itching up his trousers, and nobody takes any notice of this old Boer. can speak Dutch fluently. And he goes up to one of the horsemen and he says, "You know, brother, I've been meaning to ask you for some time. Don't you want to sell this horse?" "No, not now, man. You know, we can talk about it another time." So he said, "Yeah, no, I don't mean right now. But if you're willing to sell it, we must talk, man. Let me take a look at him a little bit closer." So he looks at the side of the horse. He stands behind the horse. He runs his hand down the horse's leg, and he feels and pats him on. "Yeah," he says, "No, I've got to have this horse, man. We'll talk again." "Yeah, sure." And he slips out into the shadows, across the fence, down the road, and he's gone. They sought him here, they sought him there, they sought Trimble everywhere, but they couldn't find him. For days he hid in a friend's house between the ceiling and the roof. They passed food up to him. And apparently he had a lot of adventures trying to get out of the Transvaal. They nearly caught him at the Heidelberg railway station. And he talked his way past the detectives and the police there, and eventually ended up in Newcastle, in Natal. And it is said that there on the platform he pulled off his beard, threw it away, and walked off into the pages of history. And of course, once he'd disappeared, what happened? The state started rounding up all the men that worked for him. Picked them all up. Not only that, they started actively looking for complainants. The Boers looked around, spoke to people who had been punished by Trimble and his men, hauled these men of Trimble into court, brought these witnesses in, and said to the magistrate, "These people have assumed magisterial powers unto themselves, and they inflicted harm on this person by assaulting him, and we want to charge him." Well, it wasn't just Trimble and his men. The Reform Committee had been promised what? Not a hair of your head will be harmed. And furthermore, you will not lose an hour of your freedom. They were rounded up, one by one, in quick succession, taken to Pretoria prison and thrown into the most appalling conditions that you can imagine. These were refined people. They were the leading businessmen and architects of Johannesburg, mining magnates, people who attended the races, wore nice clothes, went to the theatres. You know, they were the upper crust of society. Yet now, here they were, sharing cells with common criminals, sleeping on lice-infested mattresses, fleas crawling all over their bodies, treated like criminals. They were all called together. 63 of them in total were arrested. Some were not leaders. They were just somebody who put their name on a piece of paper at some point saying that they were with the reformers. They supported the Reform Committee. That was enough. They were arrested. And the state prosecutor made them a deal and said, "Okay, you guys are going to be charged with treason. You know that we can't just let this go. I mean, you caused such an uproar in Johannesburg. You know, something must follow. But don't worry, it's not going to be a big issue, you know. Yeah, there's going to be a court case, little token fine here and there. It's just symbolic, you know, that's all that it is. But don't worry. But only if you can all sign admission of guilt. But you must all do it The whole lot of you, no exceptions. If you don't, I can't say what's going to happen in court. But if you want a lenient sentence, just do yourself a favor and sign. So they all had a chat amongst themselves, and they agreed, okay, we'll sign admission of guilt. We traitors. So they signed. And the day of their court appearance came. They weren't worried. They'd been told by the state's prosecutor, everything will be fine. We've got your admission of guilt. Just be patient. You'll soon be out on the street, which was something nice to look forward to. The trial began. It started winding down, and it had almost ended, and it had gone pretty well. And then it changed. All of a sudden, the tone in this courtroom changed, and the prosecutor was asking for the death sentence. So, 4 men: Colonel Rhodes, John Hayes Hammond, Lionel Phillips, along with George Farrar, all sentenced to death. 4 men. Absolutely shattered at the news. The rest of the people, heavy fines. A year in prison, plus the fine. If you don't pay the fine, you add more time. Cary Davids, he was really angry. The man in charge of them there, a fellow by the name of Du Plessis, had received orders, look, don't make it easy for them, eh? Make it as tough and difficult as you can, because we want them to pay those fines and then get rid of them and, be done with it. So, just put the pressure on. Now, Cary Davids was rebuking himself that he had signed that admission of guilt, because then there started a process of other documents that had to be signed. It was petitions, and it was confessions, and it was appeals. It seemed like every other day there'd be another document that they'd be asked to sign. But some signed and some didn't, and some signed some papers and some signed others. And when papers were put before him by Du Plessis, he just told him, go fly a kite, man. Don't come to me with your papers. Signed more than enough already. Said, you must pay the fine. So I won't pay the fine. So, but you can afford the fine, surely. I mean, Mr. Cary Davids, you got enough money. I got enough money. I'm not giving it to you. There is another man I need to mention who was imprisoned at Pretoria. And he was a companion of Cary Davids. And this was a man by the name of Aubrey Wool Sampson. Now, Aubrey, there's only one way to describe him. He was his own master. He did what he wanted in this world, and what he wanted more than anything else was to be serving in a fighting unit. He loved warfare. He really was a warrior in every sense of the word, and a very good one too. And so it happened on one occasion during the first Anglo-Boer War, the Eerste Boereoorlog, that Aubrey was fighting on the side of the British. And it so happened on a particular day in an engagement that he found himself sort of stuck behind an anthill. And about 50 yards away was a similar anthill with a Boer hiding behind that. So here they were exchanging shots at each other, and both happened to be very good marksmen. So every time the Boer showed a bit of himself, Aubrey put a bullet into him. And every time Aubrey dared to look and peer out from behind his anthill, he got a well-aimed round coming back at him. And so this continued until the Boer fell silent. At that time, he had 7 bullets from Aubrey in him. And, he just lay there. He couldn't move, he couldn't talk, he couldn't do anything. He was at death's door. And Aubrey was in a similar position, because on peering out behind the anthill to see what was going on, he caught one last bullet. Somebody said, got it in the neck. It severed the skin and the flesh around the artery. What is it called? Carotid artery? Oh, I hope I got that right and I haven't made a fool of myself. I'm not a medical man. But at any rate, it exposed this. And people say they could see the blood pumping through it. And it was like a membrane over it, which looked as though it could be fractured. And it looked so delicate. And Aubrey wanted to get up. And he wouldn't listen when people told him to lie still. And the CO was called. And he said, Aubrey, just lie still, man. Don't move your head or do anything, because you've been very badly wounded. We're going to put you on a wagon and take you to hospital. But try and lie still, man, and just calm down for a minute. So they got him to hospital, and they were able to patch him up as best as they could. And so he lay there. At first not knowing that in the bed beside him, occupied by the very Boer that he had been shooting at, a man by the name of Hans Botha. And Hans Botha and Aubrey Wills Sampson became lifelong friends. Kruger was facing big difficulties. He had let Jameson and his men go. Many of the burghers were not happy about that, and they were demanding the blood of these reformers. So he had pressure from his own people. And then he had pressure from the imperial government. Poor old Hercules Robinson, he was, he had given up. He really was so weak and ineffective. But not Chamberlain. Chamberlain sent some very strong messages to Kruger, and he said, listen, that is not how a civilized country behaves. I'm sorry. And then he started giving examples. Do you remember way back in that year, this happened, a British officer was killed? By whom? By your burghers. What happened when we tried them? We let them go because of the process of law. There was some issues over there, but you know that they did it. I know they did it, but they were set free. And then on this case, so he went through a few of these legal sort of examples. And he said, now you behaving completely differently. Bear this in mind, that the empire always finds a way to avenge its dead heroes. He was getting stick from Hans Botha. Hans was there almost every day, nagging him. You've got to let these people go. My friend is in there. He's a good man. You've got to let him go. You know, there's so much about this story, which reminds one of a Gilbert and Sullivan production. I mean, here you've got a medical doctor, Dr. Jameson. He's not only an accomplished medical doctor, all right? He is an induna in the Matabele army. Lobengula appointed him one. There was a time when this same doctor, university educated, with a very fine reputation for his medical skills, would dance before the king, dressed in a loincloth and animal skins with ostrich feathers in his hair, waving a spear in one hand and carrying a shield in the other. This man leads an invasion into a friendly country. You got him. Then you've got a president who believes the world is flat and who has said that Jews should only be entitled to half the property that Christians have because Jews only believe half the Bible. Then you have a man, a famous cricketer at one time, wounded on the battlefield at Doornkop, left for dead, who then finds his way back home in England, before the news reaches his family, and he arrives in time to attend his own memorial service. And a lot of little cameo roles all along to make this crazy story of the Jameson raid. But the craziest of all, I think, is the character that we find standing outside President Paul Kruger's office one morning. There he is. He's an ex-prize fighter who used to bet upon himself. And now he's come today to bet everything that he has on the lives of these reformers. He's standing there, dressed in a black cape, black jacket, funeral clothes. He's got a top hat with black crepe wrapped around it. Nobody smiles. Nobody sniggers at him when they walk past. Why? Because this man is the richest man in South Africa. Some say at that time the richest in the world. His assets exceed even that of Cecil John Rhodes. And he's standing there waiting to see the president. Kruger invites him in. And this man says, if you hang those reformers, I will collapse the Transvaal economy. Like that. And for an hour and a half he sets out facts and figures before the president. Already this crisis, he says, has cost you £20 million so far to the state. He said, but it's going to cost you this amount in loss of revenue, £200,000 a month, every month, every month, every month. Because I will close my mines down. I will flood the shafts. I will close every business down. I will sell all my properties. I will collapse the property market here in the Transvaal. Land I will give away for a song. You won't be able to sell it and make anything. You cannot use collateral in the banks for loans. You will not open my mines again. I will do all of that. You will have nothing if you hang those men. So that is what their lives are worth to you. Thank you for your time, sir. And he walks out. Percy Fitzpatrick, author of Jock of the Bushveld, says that was the only thing that Kruger listened to. Wasn't prepared to listen to Chamberlain, or even to his own people, or even to Hans Botha. But he was willing to listen to that man. And that man was Barney Bonato. And Kruger then said, okay, you guys, you're not going to get hung. I'm going to give you some very heavy fines. I think it was £20,000 each. And he said, and I want undertaking from you. You'll have to sign a paper that you won't partake in any political activities. And Frank Rhodes had had enough. I'm signing nothing. He said, you don't sign. He said, I'm going to banish you from the country. He said, do what you want to. I'm not signing. So, the others paid the fines. Rhodes also paid the fine. I mean, he couldn't sit in prison. And they let him out. And eventually everybody was out of Pretoria prison, except who? I'll give you a guess. Gary Davies and Aubrey Wool Sampson. There they sat. They were a big problem to the state. You must pay your fine. We refused to pay the fine. Do you know, the poor guys, they couldn't even eat their food. The food that they gave them was so bad that they were bribing the guards to bring them food. They paid for the food, they wouldn't pay for the fine. And Kruger said, we've got to get him out there, man. Somebody came up with the great idea. Well, when it's Queen Victoria's Jubilee, which is in a few months' time, we'll release these men as like a kind of a present to her. I said, great, this gets us out of that predicament. And so the day arrived when Du Plessis opened the door, and I think the official wording was, your presence is no longer convenient to the state of the Transvaal. But in reality, I think they were told, "Futsack, and don't come back here." And so they were thrown out. They went on, the two of them, to form that illustrious regiment, the Imperial Light Horse. The Boer government made no concessions. Everything stayed the same as it was. No political power for the Uitlanders. The food that came into the country was heavily taxed. Everything was taxed. Dynamite for the mines. I won't even get into that. With Lippert and his so-called homemade South African dynamite that was unsafe as anything. In the meantime, it was all the leftovers that he could buy in Europe cheaply and repackage it here. He had a monopoly for that. Everybody had a monopoly for everything. And that situation still pertained. And I suppose it was inevitable that eventually matters moved toward the Second Boer War. It got closer and closer, and then it just happened. I think I should just say in closing, Boertjies, you really bullocks us on that Jameson raid, eh? You outfought us, you outthought us, you outmaneuvered us, you outshot us, you outgeneraled us, and you outnumbered us. Let's not forget that, by a vast majority. But never mind, we won't quibble, eh? We'll give it to you. We'll meet you again in the Boer War, and I think you'll find we'll give a better account of ourselves there against you. But yeah, time passed and we became good friends, eh? Fought shoulder to shoulder, First World War, Second World War. Yeah, and I think if anybody looks at a list of names of people that fought in the Rhodesian Bush War, they'd be surprised to see how many Boer names are amongst them. Yeah, my Afrikaner friends, you love that country as much as anybody could. You lived next door to us, went to school with us, worked alongside us, fought with us to preserve that land. Well, folks, I'm not going to go on much longer. I've already taken up far too much of everybody's time. But keep well and take care, and God bless you all, eh? Bye.